Hello everyone, my name is Rebecca, and in this week's video, I'm going to be studying artists that I admire. When I was younger, this is something I would do very often. If I found an artist with an art style that I really liked, I would study their art and try to include things that I liked in my style. However, I have found with time this is something I do way less often. I will kind of study other people's art while scrolling on Instagram or something, but I won't sit down and actually do in-depth studies. So today we are going to change that. The first artist I'll be studying is Chihiro Howe. I have loved her work for years, and I found her through her Copic marker tutorials that I can no longer find any traces of, sadly. The characters that she draws and her style are super cute and very well done. While I do love everything about her style, the main thing I wanted to study from her today is the way she draws hands and feet. I always admire the way she stylizes these on her characters, and I want to try to include some of that stylization in my own art. For this, I'll be drawing on my iPad in Procreate. I thought you all might find this footage a bit more interesting if you could see my hand actually doing the drawing. And I have this reference window open with my first reference. I'm starting off by getting the basic form of the palm in place. If you have a hard time drawing hands, I highly recommend focusing on getting more comfortable with drawing the palm in different positions and views. Since the palm is the base for the hand, it's really important to get right. To help me visualize the finger placement, I draw circles along the top of the palm. This always helps me think of the palm as a more 3D form. Next, I go into drawing the fingers. From my time spent only visually studying Chihiro's style, I learned that she likes to stylize the fingers on the longer side. Now, don't get me wrong, I do like the look of this. However, I'm going to draw the fingers closer to the length that I usually draw them, since the length of the fingers isn't really something I want to change about my style of drawing hands. That being said, something I do want to improve at stylizing is the palm of the hand and its details. I find a lot of times I don't know how I want to stylize the palm, and I always kind of go back to the same basic lines that I always draw. However, this way of drawing the palm doesn't work for all positions. Something I learned with this first study is that in my art, I need to try to think of the palm more as two parts instead of one part. In the palm, we have the area where the first set of knuckles sit, and this area can change in appearance depending on how the fingers are positioned. Also, I need to not be afraid of indicating things like the skin folding or pinching because of the way the hand is positioned. I find this is a detail I shy away from for some reason, but including this detail does really better help convey the hand's pose. And so here's my first study. I feel like it turned out pretty decent. For the second study, I chose a subject that has a more complicated pose that includes foreshortening. I was nervous to draw this pose, but also felt like it would be good for me. Because I was feeling less confident for capturing this pose, I decided to do a rougher sketch first to help me get the shapes in place, and then I will do a second sketch that focuses more on the details. For this drawing, I was thinking about the inside of the hand, but to help me draw the pose, I was focusing more on the silhouette of the hand, especially when it came to the fingers. Like if I had been focusing on just drawing this finger itself, I think I would have drawn it much longer. But because I was looking at the silhouette and how much the shape of the finger protruded from the main shape, this helped me get closer to the original. I feel like this is something I can apply to future hand drawings when I'm working from a reference. Something else I learned is that I want to try to include these lines that indicate the kind of inner knuckle forms or kind of folds of the skin. These are lines I never considered, but when I look at my own hand and move it around, I can see how these forms would be helpful to include. Plus, I often find this area of the palm to be weirdly empty, and I never know how to go about detailing it. So I feel like this is a good way to go about doing so. I did do a third hand pose study, but compared to the first two, I feel like I don't have a ton to say about it, so we're going to kind of just speed through the footage. So my main takeaways from these studies is 1, I need to be better about thinking of the palm as two parts. The bottom kind of pad area, and then the area that kind of changes with how the fingers move. 2, I need to not be afraid of including details like the skin folding or pinching. 3, if needed, I can add these lines to the palm. 4, when drawing from references, paying attention to the silhouette is very helpful. Once I felt like I had studied the hands enough, I moved on to feet. This first study is actually from Chihiro's How to Draw book. This picture was actually provided to me by my sister since she owns the book. I keep meaning to buy it but never get around to doing so. I figured this foot in side view would be a good one to start with since it's pretty simple. For me, drawing feet, and especially the toes, has always been a bit of a weak point, mostly because it's not something I need to do too often, and it can be easily avoided if you just put shoes or socks onto a character. but it's always something I want to be better at doing, and I never really like the way I stylize feet. However, I often like the way Chihiro goes about drawing them. Something that I learned from this study is that I needed to find more how the big toe points forward and how all the other toes point downwards. This is something I was kind of aware of before, but for some reason it kind of just clicked more while doing this study. The next study I did is from a panel of Chihiro's comic where the feet are drawn in front view. I always find this view to be especially tricky, so I felt like it would be a good one for me to study. In a moment when I get around to drawing the big toe, you might notice I do a kind of sketchy, swirly motion when drawing it. This is something I will often do when drawing a form that is being foreshortened. And it's actually a technique I learned ages ago from one of Saikura's videos. I think it was called the coil method. He doesn't post much anymore, but his videos helped me so much back in the day when I was learning to draw. And this coil method for drawing foreshortened objects has always stuck with me. Something I took away from this study is that including the toenails is very helpful for further conveying the proportions and perspective of the toes. And I think this is something I'm going to try to include more often. In my head, adding the nails always sounded more intimidating or complicated, but drawing them in, even if they are a bit wonky, I feel like helps convey the forms much better. The last study is from an illustration of an Oni or ogre kind of character, hence why the foot is red and has pointed nails. My main takeaway from this study is that I need to be better about defining the smaller toes as 3 separate parts. In my head, I often want to draw the smaller toes as 2 parts, like this, but I noticed that I should be including the part where the toes dip down at the tip where the nail is. This is a detail I never really include, and it could be one of the reasons I often feel like the toes I draw look off. So in conclusion, for the feet, I need to 1. Further define that the big toe points up and the smaller toes point down. 2. Draw the toenails to better show the form of the toes. And 3, think of the toes as 3 parts instead of only 2 parts. So yeah, those are my studies. I totally recommend checking out Chihiro Howe's work. It is super amazing. I will leave links to her socials in the description. The next artist I wanted to study is Samdoesarts. He is a very talented artist, and something I always really love is his rendering style. It often has a feeling of being loose, but also captures lighting in a really beautiful way. So for my study of his work, I wanted to focus on how Sam renders his pieces. Before jumping into drawing, I tried to find some specific pieces that I wanted to study. I found that I really love the drawings of characters against a blue sky. So I'm going to refer to this piece, especially since it has the kind of looser feeling that I really like. Another thing I did is I watched this video tutorial on Sam's channel, and it really helped me better understand his rendering process. In this video, he is working off a reference picture. So to help me better capture the lighting for my piece, you can see that I'm also drawing from a reference. I found this reference on Pinterest, and honestly, I kind of hate Pinterest now because of all the AI junk and ads on there. But for some reason, I still go back to it. If you know of any good Pinterest alternatives, I would love to hear them. For my sketch, I'm heavily drawing from my reference, but I'm also not trying to do a one-to-one recreation. I mostly took liberties with drawing the hair. I kind of changed how it's blowing in the wind. Also, I did decide to draw in a more semi-realistic style, since this will make it easier to mimic the lighting and how it follows the form of the face. When drawing in a more stylized style, you can use references for lighting, but how the lighting is translated can kind of shift. In this case, I wanted to be able to follow the reference a bit more closely. For my cleanup sketch / line art, I'm drawing inspiration from Sam's pieces. His line work is often more loose, but also kind of has a feeling of confidence behind it. So in doing this, I tried my best to make very confident strokes, and I tried my best to not let myself zoom in. A lot of times when I do line work, I will zoom in a lot and fuss over tiny details. But for this, I tried to be looser and not zoom in. Plus, with being zoomed out, it can make it easier for my arm to draw more confident strokes. I've talked in previous videos how I want to get better at sketching more confidently, but it's definitely a learning process. It also just takes more effort since it's something I'm not used to. I find that when I'm tired, I just want to go back to my default way of doing things, which isn't necessarily bad, but it's also not great when you're wanting to try to include new things in your art or work process. I find the older I get, the more stuck in my ways I am. It feels harder to train myself to do things in a new way. Next, I'm filling in the base colors. In Sam's tutorial, he filled in the whole drawing subject with gray and then colored individual areas by alpha locking the gray layer. Or he also said you could clip a layer to the gray layer. And this is a very effective method. However, I'm the kind of artist where I really like having different parts be on their own layers. This allows me to clip layers to the individual parts and gives me more control. For art, I can oftentimes be very timid and I don't like committing to things. I always want to have the option to start over or redo things, which can be helpful, but also I feel like a hindrance at times. Now that I have the base colors in place, we can start adding the shadows. Something that Sam recommended doing is taking the eyedropper tool to your reference picture to get an idea of what the shadow color is. However, you do this to only help you get an idea of the color, and you actually pick the color yourself. In this case, the color was much darker and more desaturated than I was anticipating. Usually I would have taken a deep muted purple color and would have set the layer to multiply to get a similar result to this. And I don't mind using layer modes, but I do always want to improve at picking colors on my own instead of relying on layer modes. So this is something I should probably do more often. So I go around the entire picture and add in the darkest shadows I am seeing. I am also blocking in the colors in a kind of cell shaded way. I'm not worrying about soft or hard shadows at the moment, only where the color is being placed. Something that Sam said in his video that was really helpful is that 2 become 4 and 4 becomes more. He was saying this in reference to how many colors we are applying. So for this, I only focused on the first color for each part being the deepest shadows. And now I'm going to go to each part and add the secondary shadow color. For the skin, this was a darker and slightly more saturated version of the base color. Having this saying of 2 becomes 4 and 4 becomes more really helped me to think of things as one step at a time, instead of getting caught up in the more subtle colors too early on, especially when I'm working from a reference. When I'm not working from a reference, I do tend to take things more one step at a time because I'm working from imagination. However, when I have a reference, I see all these subtle colors and soft transitions that I want to capture, and I can end up getting a bit overwhelmed. But this method helped me break up the process into being more manageable. Now that we have the colors established, the next step is to use the blending tool to soften the edges that need to be softer, and we're going to maintain the edges that are harder. For this process, I was referring to my reference a lot to see which shadows had a softer edge and which ones had a harder edge. And I do have to say, I forget how nice it is to work from a reference. I do draw from reference fairly often, however, I will rarely use references for coloring, and I do feel like I should do this more often, not only because it does help a lot, but I also learn a lot from it. So doing more studies like this I think will really help me. Something that I was feeling a bit discouraged about during this process is that I felt like I wasn't getting that loose or painty feeling that Sam's rendering style often has, and I feel like this is for a couple of reasons. Reason 1 is that I was taking on a lot all at once with this piece. I'm coloring in a different way and the process overall is different. And because it is so different, I'm not as confident, and I feel like if you want to have a feeling of looseness that doesn't just feel messy, you also need to have a feeling of confidence. And since this is new to me, that confidence to be looser isn't there yet. Reason 2 is that I haven't found very many painty brushes that I love or that I'm super familiar with. Now, brushes aren't everything, and brushes don't make the artist. In fact, many amazing artists will work with just the basic round brush. However, in this case, I feel like I would have benefited from having a better understanding of paint-like brushes. Maybe for a future video, I can focus on trying to find paint brushes and textured brushes that I like. And I suppose the third reason is related to what I said earlier. Earlier I said I can be very timid when it comes to art. And this timid nature results in me wanting control. I want the process to be very structured with certain steps that I follow, and this results in me having a hard time being looser. I was talking about this with my sister, and she agreed with me that we love the look of looser, painty-like art, but we have a hard time committing to the looser art process. It just often feels not as structured and a little bit more all over the place. My favorite part to work on was the hair for this piece. I did take some creative liberties and made the highlights much stronger just to make things kind of pop. I really enjoyed adding the extra hair strands and more details to the hair. I feel like this really brought the piece to life. To add the gaps in between the hair, I just went over the hair with the same color I used for the sky. If I was doing this on a more detailed background, I would have erased some of the base color of the hair to make these gaps, but using the sky color over the base color worked really well in this case. For the eyes, I just colored them in the way I usually do. I still wanted the piece to have a part that felt like me, and a lot of people tell me that they can identify my art by how I draw and render eyes. So yeah, I kind of just drew them in my normal way. For the last step, I wanted to try to add some of these fun texture elements that Sam includes in his art, mostly being the lines and dot patterns. Also, I have to say it is very hard to find good multi-line brushes. I tried making my own, I tried some from the CSP library, and none of them felt right to me. If you know of any good multi-line brushes for Clip Studio Paint that you like, I'd love to hear about them. But I did really like adding these extra elements. I kept them pretty subtle, but I do feel like they add a sort of liveliness that I really like. I kind of want to find my own way of adding textural elements like this to my pieces. Maybe something a little bit more unique to me that isn't just copying the way that Sam does it. Also, something I forgot to talk about is that this piece made me notice that I often shy away from darker colors. Like if I had been shading a lighting scenario like this without a reference, I would not have made the shadow this dark. So for future pieces, I feel like I can maybe try to lean more into bolder shadow choices. So I suppose the main things I'm taking away from the study is 1, to work on being more loose with some of my pieces. 2, I want to find some paintbrushes and textured brushes that I like, and I want to become more familiar with them. 3, use references for lighting more often. 4, work on picking colors on my own instead of always relying on layer modes. 5, be more bold with color choices. Anyways, here's my finished piece. I don't know if it fully captures the feeling I was wanting, but I am happy with how it turned out. And it was a lot of fun to work in this way. Like I said, Sam is a really talented artist and I recommend checking out his work. There are links to his socials as well as the video tutorial I followed in the description. Before we end, I want to thank my super awesome YouTube members and Patreon patrons for their support. It means so much to me. And thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next week in my next video. Bye!